Well, thank you. Can finally start to relax a bit.
Yes.
That's an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome.
So, Landi, Mike, thank you so much for coming through. It's a real pleasure to have you in person. I think I've seen you do your thing before, and I'm quite excited to be having you on the podcast, and then also sharing the event Navigating Global Crisis a bit later today. And I think the intent today is really just to get some more insights as to who you are, share it with our audience, and learn more about what it is that you do and the amazing stuff that you're evangelizing across the globe.
Awesome. It's lovely to be here, Llewellan.
Totally. It's nice of you to say we're coming through. I thought, is this a spiritual show? We're coming through from the other side, right?
Well, there is a bit of a spiritual element to what you do, isn't there?
Of course.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So maybe for the benefit of the audience, if you can just provide a bit of background from both of you as to who you are and your genesis story of what led you to this point, and then maybe we can dive into what it is that you do.
I come from corporate, Llewellan. You know, I've always, since student years, been obsessed with boardrooms, probably because in my 20s, I got approached by the Secret Service and they've asked me to actually sign up as an industrial spy. But I luckily asked them about what's the downfall, and they said, well, in South Africa, the death penalty. So that was a long hour-and-a-half conversation in a student cafeteria. And that gave me a hunger to know what's going on in the boardrooms of all these corporations, that people would actually employ a person in one bank in order to get information to another bank. So very early I got into corporate. After, as I would call it, my boot camp years in corporate, I made the shift to entrepreneurship. And then later when I met Mike, we went from entrepreneurship into what we're talking about later today, conscious leadership, which is really looking for an individual who's not only a leader, but a leader with more of an open mind and someone who has that spiritual element to them. Freedom, prosperity, purpose. That's what we stand for. So that's just a short synopsis of how I got here today.
Wow.
You, my darling.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, if I may, before
No,
we
please
jump
do.
to you,
Landi's much more interesting.
So, I mean, that sounds like something out of a spy novel. You know, so I mean, we you and I share something in common. We're both from South Africa, and I think we're both proudly South African.
Very much so.
And it's nice to see that fellow South Africans gone global. So, I mean, it really sounds like something out of a spy novel, that you got approached by the Secret Service to do some, what do they call it?
Industrial espionage.
Industrial
that would
espionage.
be, yeah.
Wow.
We've recently found out that it's basically because of the area in which I've studied, which is industrial psychology. And that obviously, I mean, there would be probably not that I'm knowledgeable in espionage or the field, but there's quite a wide area of faculties. But for industrial espionage, they were looking specifically for people with industrial psychology. And recently we found out that apparently it's in my family. So we have a side of our family that we're not aware of. The bloodline just keeps on stopping in the family tree. So apparently it comes from my mother's father's side. And so we're highly suspicious that he would have been a spy as well. In fact, we recently had a very credible source in South Africa confirm to us that he actually was. But we're only at the start of finding that part of the journey. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And if I may just probe a little bit on the point, and I'll move along. So what made you decide not to go forward with that?
Well, I think the consequences, you know, in South Africa, it's the death penalty that applies if they catch you. So the guy who tried to recruit me had a long conversation with me about the ups and the benefits and who you'll be helping and the type of lifestyle I'll be having. And but I think two of the big things that stood out for me is I would have had high risk in terms of the consequence. And number two, you can't really have a proper relationship with anyone ever, because you basically lead double lives. I'm sure there's many, many people who can't talk about these things that would listen to this and sometimes wish they knew these things before they make those decisions. And, this is the type of topics that's going to come up in the podcast today with you. And later today is the choices we make in life and the consequences of those choices. That for me is what character is. Yeah.
I was just going to make that comment. It's like you had a hard fork in the road there.
Yep.
Your life could have gone left and dramatically left or
Very,
right.
yeah.
And now you evangelizing conscious leadership. So it's quite a contrast.
Very much so, yeah.
Although she did shoot a gun perfectly at a bullseye in Florida in a TV studio when nobody else could hit anything, even the target.
Okay, now no one's going to trust me.
And she says she's never shot a gun before, so, the jury's still out.
I think, like she said, it maybe runs in the blood.
Yeah, exactly.
Genetics. Nice.
You can't choose your family.
No.
No, that's fascinating. Well, thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome, Llewellan.
And yourself, Mike?
Orphaned at 15, always wanted to be a musician. Was lucky enough to do that and be sort of like a touring musician for about 12 years of my life. And so I had the opportunity to stand on a lot of stages, right? And interact with people. No stage diving. It's not a good idea when you play the guitar. It really hurts people. But then from there into financial services, where I ended up as general manager of the biggest financial services company in New Zealand, and then into entrepreneurship and writing books and, really trying to help people across the world in terms of their personal and professional development, which I've been doing for the last 20 years. And that's led me to, I've been to 108 countries, spoken on stages in more than 50, over 2,500 events and 300,000 people. So we've got around.
And you're only starting.
Maybe.
Well, it sounds from our discussion, I think it was the day before yesterday, that you've got quite a jam-packed schedule for 2023 coming out of COVID. It's nice to see that things are picking up again. You just finished a trip to India. How was that?
Huge. In terms of we average 4.5 hours sleep a day. We just had meeting after meeting after meeting. We love India. It was my 22nd trip to India, so I'm pretty familiar with India. But, in India, you've got to navigate the business landscape, but also the Indian landscape because it's all encompassing, right?
Yeah.
There's always people around you. There's always people who need something. There's never enough to give of yourself or from a charity perspective, so we were working with our chosen charities there. We were working with NGOs and we're doing our for-profit stuff as well. So it was a combination. Every day was a different day and exciting.
No.
For us, Llewellan, it's about culture. So it's just different every single country. And, we used to circle the planet before COVID, probably 4.5 times a year. But you get complacent and you get used to it. And I think COVID has really, really grounded us and gave us more humility than what we had before. So you can drop us now into any country and any culture. We'll be learning, and just so grateful to be there. India is colorful. There's massive opportunities. It's definitely a nation that's rising. And we've noticed that, they are all about education, and they very commercially inclined as well, but they do have that spiritual element. So we're watching that nation as they rise, and that's why we want to be part of it.
Amazing. And for the benefits of the people listening, maybe you can just share a little bit more about the Circle of Excellence and the organizations that you both head up, and explain what that is.
Sure. Circle of Excellence really came about after a conversation I had with the Prime Minister of New Zealand back in 2008, where he said to me, politicians will struggle to make lasting change. There's very few Gandhis. He said big corporate leaders, too many things impacting on them, shareholders, et cetera, et cetera. He said lasting change on the planet's got to come from grassroots entrepreneurship. So at that point, we were trying to crack the code, and then it took me 3 years to come up with the concept of Circle of Excellence, which was really about building the number one team of transformational leaders on the planet. These days, conscious leaders is a word we use. And we launched that, and we're on a mission to find 432 conscious leaders around the world, and we've been doing it for just over 10 years now. We think we're about 20% of the way there, because a lot of people think they are a conscious leader, but it's more of a brand than a way of life and a way of thinking, and we can get into that a little bit more. But Circle of Excellence Group is a group of companies. It's different places around the world. There's a magazine business. There's an intellectual property company. There's the Expert Institute. There's an investment company in it as well. There's shareholdings in other major businesses also. So, whilst I'm the chairman and Landi's the CEO, I mean, basically what we do is we connect, collaborate, and co-create with people. And we use the power of our voice to create the attraction to do so.
In your definition of conscious leadership, what is a conscious leader? What defines a conscious leader?
I think Forbes magazine back in 2016 gave the best definition I've seen. They said that a conscious leader is not trying to save the planet. A conscious leader is a person who is prepared to do the deep inner work inside themselves to show up as the best and most authentic version of themselves in order to help humanity and the planet.
Wow. There's a concept I came across probably a decade ago, which sounds like it's in the same kind of category, which I've always believed, as humanity, we have all the technology and knowledge to solve the compelling pain points that exist. And what's missing, I termed it, and there's a white paper or something I read called Evolutionary Leaders. And I think that ties in with the work that you're doing. And I think it's really amazing that you have this clear, big, hairy, audacious goal of identifying and developing 432, you said, conscious leaders around the globe. Why 432? Is that because of the frequency?
It's definitely got to do with the frequency. Yeah. See, all matter comes from light and all light comes from sound. It's quantum physics 101. And 432, which we could spend a whole other podcast on, is the most profound frequency in terms of it appears in all the sacred ancient texts, right? So it appears in the Nordic, in the Icelandic sagas. It appears in the Bhagavad Gita. It appears in the Quran. It appears in the Bible. It appears in the Corpus Hermetica. And 432 is also a relationship we see on Earth a lot. So the distance between the Earth and the Sun is a ratio of 1 to 43,200. And between, the Moon and the Sun is also 1 to 43,200. So you see it in the solar system as well. Don't get me started on 432. So when we didn't start out with 432, strangely enough, we started out to say, okay, it's impossible for us to create 1 million conscious leaders with just Mike and Landi. But how many people do we really need to create that are conscious leaders that also have people following them that can be more conscious? And so that we did the math, and the number came up to around 432, surprisingly. So, if we looked at somebody like, let's just take a speaker, for instance, who is a conscious leader, and there aren't that many of them, but let's take one who is, generally they'll influence 2,000 to 3,000 people. So 432 multiplied by about 2,500 gets you 1 million. And that's a country about the size of Mauritius. And I think if we can do that in our lifetime, then we've done the best that we can for the planet with what we know.
It's a nice mark for us to leave, yeah.
And you have to have a benchmark. Otherwise, it just becomes esoteric. And where we started back in 2011 was we were esoteric. We said, we want to build the number one team of transformational leaders on the planet. Well, that's great. And I always knew, how are we going to judge that? And I thought it's going to come out of this, but it took 10 years for us to realize what that was.
Yeah, it's I'm getting goosebumps here. It's quite inspirational stuff. And a lot of this really resonates with me. I think that there's a book I recently read by Eckhart Tolle, which is A New Earth. And in that, he dives a lot into consciousness and, how the greats were the first to really discover consciousness and give us blueprints that we could try and follow to elevate ourselves to a higher consciousness. And, you look at the world today and you look at the campaign, and that's why I think it's amazing that I've been able to get you to come and join the Navigating Global Crisis campaign. Is the if I have to give you my personal opinion, my view of the world, there's a lot of strife and turmoil, but there's nothing that we can't fix. And I think what's missing is consciousness. And I almost am of the opinion that when we lose our focus on developing consciousness and uplifting consciousness, that's when you see really strange events or manifestations of things that become problematic in the earth. And I would be interested to hear more of your thoughts around that.
Well, I think for me, I'll keep it really simple. There's a lot of, if you take CERN, right? CERN is the underground scientific research center on the border of Switzerland and France that fires atoms and stuff at each other around a circular tube that goes for about 30 kilometers or something. But, what they've been able to prove there essentially is if there is no observation, it doesn't happen. So it's the old, if a tree fell down in the forest and nobody heard it, did the tree fall down? Well, more and more from a quantum perspective, the answer is no.
Reality is based on the perceiver.
Yeah, reality is definitely based on the perceiver. And, it's so funny. I remember I released a book about 10 years ago, and in there I had a lot of, let's call them case studies, but stories really about one of my friends and I, how we grew up. And I said to him after he read the book, I said, what did you think of the stories? He said, what a load of crap. It didn't happen like that. I said, yes, it did. Look, this happened like that. It goes, no, it happened like that. And I realized neither of us were wrong. We just perceived it in the same way. And it's so interesting. There's a concept from a consciousness point of view that your future changes your past. Right? And that's a hard one for people to grasp. But if I take my friend and my scenario there, I saw a situation that happened, say, 30 years ago at school as happening this way. He saw it as happening that way. So his past is different than mine because of that. So it's fascinating when you dig into this, and it gives us hope that we can not be affected by what politicians do or which country's invading which country or this and that and the other, or food shortages, electricity shortages in Africa, etc., that we can actually create our own reality and exist in that own reality. And probably a great place to start is not reading the newspapers, because then you simply are not aware, or don't watch CNN or Fox or any of those sort of channels, because then you don't become any less aware, because I haven't looked at those things for 10 years, but people seem to think I'm pretty up to date. But you just be able to manage your own personal energy better rather than getting sucked into a vortex of what somebody or something what you sucked into.
Yeah. I think I did that personally about 2 or 3 years ago. I completely isolated myself from mainstream media. I deleted Facebook, Instagram. I found that very superficial. I kept my Twitter account, but I cleansed it, and then I reorganized who I follow so that I could follow people of inspiration. And an interesting thing started happening where, first of all, my stream of consciousness became decluttered, and I didn't have these emotions stirring through me. Unfortunately, when I was still living in South Africa, you would still have it in your face quite a bit. But even now, since I've moved to Singapore, I've kind of cocooned myself from that level of information. The point I'm trying to make is that as soon as I've started doing that, I found that I have a lot more clarity and focus, number one. Number two, when I do re-look at it, I see just a facade. When I look at the politics or the media itself and how they portray things, I can almost see through it, and you can almost see the propaganda. I don't know if that's unique.
Harry and Meghan, right? Seriously, what effect does that have on anybody's life? But there are people that are addicted to that. It is a facade.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I feel like most of the world is still plugged into that mainstream noise.
Well, I think there's a spiritual law. I know there's a spiritual law that says as within, so without. So when you take that spiritual law and you make it practical and you make it, how does the law of as within, so without affect my day-to-day reality, number one? And how does that law affect what's going on in the world? Then you realize that we are responsible for what's going on in the world. But if it doesn't directly affect you, then it's very easy for you to wash your hands and go, look, what did I do to make this happen? And just pretend that you were not part of this whole, whatever is happening at the moment. So because of the law of as within, so without, it's not necessarily what we are physically doing on a day-to-day basis that's creating this world. It's what's going on within us. It is leaving a group of friends and then gossiping behind their back, because that vibration has consequences. It is being unfaithful to the people we love. It is knowing that you should have more discipline in your life and not paying any attention to it. It is becoming a better person so that you attract the right partner in your life. That is the stuff that we're not looking at that's creating the world on the outside. So it's easy to blame a country. It's easy to blame your ex. It's easy to blame the way your parents has raised you. And so the spiritual law is not saying as without, so within. So what's happening around us shouldn't have any effect on us whatsoever. The spiritual law is saying as within, so without. So we are in control of everything that's happening at the moment, so we can undo that. But when Mike said, in terms of quantum physics, if there's not an observer, it actually shouldn't be happening. In the same way, when we can detach, and that's my definition of consciousness, is to become more aware of our patterns and behavior and detach in a way where we can observe ourselves honestly and make the changes, we'll see the changes in the world.
Yeah, I think I've always believed myself that we underestimate the power that every single human can have on the environment around them. And I've gone down the quantum physics rabbit hole, and that's really fascinating stuff. And you know, I've also had moments where I've deep dived into different spirituality doctrines. I've looked at Vedanta. I've gone into Buddhism. I've looped back to Christianity. I read the book on Prophet Muhammad. And, you know, you walk away from each of those with a sense of love for the individuals and what they were trying to do. I think more and more I'm starting to get a grip on what it is that they were trying to pass down, because what happens is, in my opinion, is that when you do go pure, when you do clean up your act, when you do remove the lower vibrational tendencies from your life, that you start elevating and you see things a lot more clearly, and you can control and shape things around you and influence people. And I suppose when the greats hit a certain level, how do you communicate that to people that aren't there yet? And how do you give them something to use as a blueprint to be able to kind of find the same path?
Well, I think we live in what I would say, a very linear society. So we've been taught in the society that you have to do. You have to do certain things. You have to reach certain goals. You have to take a certain amount of steps. That's very linear, and that's very masculine energy. And I'm not talking about genders here at all. It's literally linear energy equals masculine energy. That's part of the spiritual laws as well. So I think if we can move more towards a circular approach, which is you don't really have to do, you have to be. So by being Llewellan and being yourself and be a certain way, your life become your prayer. So you don't really have to promote or give talks or speeches, whatever. People will start looking at you and going, what has happened within this person in order to be this way? And they're going to want to be that way.
Yeah, and I think it's a continuous process of development, and it's like sweeping a floor. You have to keep it clean, right?
Yeah.
There's something that I just thought of when I first met both of you, and I often, both in my own capacity and I'm sure with most people in life, there's certain things that hold you back, trauma, your childhood, things that happen in your childhood or even in your adult life that makes you struggle to progress. And I remember you explaining a practical example of, I think you called it DNA sequencing.
I think you're talking about the imprints, blind spots, undercurrents, and tunnels.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you just share a little bit more of that for everyone to understand? And
Sure.
I found that fascinating.
The principle of iBoot is that we get born without patterns. Now, that's debatable as well, so I don't want to really park there too long, but we get born and we're a blank canvas. If you a believer like I am in past lives, you're not quite a blank canvas, but I don't want to overcomplicate the conversation. So let's say you are born as a blank canvas. It happens that as you grow up, you have imprints. Imprints is the things that happens to you in your life. It can be big traumas or small traumas. Doesn't matter. But they imprint on our skin like tattoo. Like tattoos on our skin, they imprint on our soul. And so once you have an imprint from something that happened, the example may be the wife cheating on her husband or the husband cheating on the wife. There's an imprint. Next step, the person doesn't want to talk about the imprint. The imprint becomes a blind spot because they kick it under the carpet. They pretending to everyone everything's okay. That blind spot simmers because it's not addressed. Like we all have these blind spots. They simmer. It's like having a potato in your cupboard for too long. We've all had that experience. It's not pleasant. That's psychologically what we look like if we don't deal with these things. The blind spot therefore turns into an undercurrent, which is very, very powerful emotions that lies under the surface. I love to use the ocean as an example. You look at it and it looks so serene and it has sparkles on it. But what's going underneath is shipwrecks and currents. And so our psychological makeup look like that as well. So we have this incredibly strong, highly triggering emotions because of that blind spot, that potato, that simmered there. And then these undercurrents ultimately turn into tunnels. So I'm going to use the example of the unfaithful spouse. The imprint is the spouse cheat on the husband or wife. The blind spot is the one that's got cheated on, doesn't want to talk about it. They kick it under the carpet. The undercurrent is if you try and address that with them, it's a very strong emotion. That's why I'm saying look at what makes people angry. You'll see their undercurrents. And then that turns into a tunnel. So now all she can see is the type of woman that her husband cheated with, or all she can see is women that looks like that. And all she can see is all women is bad. And so she creates this tunnel vision. And suddenly all these other opportunities is not available to her anymore. And that's the danger of tunneling. And so what me and Mike feel is that if you do not go through this process of iBoot constantly and clean yourself up, as you so rightfully said, because it's going to be a constant process, you're going to turn into an automated individual. So you're not going to be you anymore. You're not going to be Llewellan. You're not going to have your beliefs. You're not going to have your personality. You're not going to have your essence. You're going to be the sum total of your traumas and imprints, unless you make a conscious decision to step out of that pattern.
And I suppose a lot of your work is centered around helping people to identify, introspect, and start actually addressing that so that they can progress. Because until you do that, you don't progress. And I know personally, I still struggle with it, with certain things that you park and you push it all the way down and you think you don't have to address it, but it keeps resurfacing at different stages in your life.
Yeah. We all have those. It's a constant process,
and you've got to clean out some of them. Yeah. And there's an interesting exercise we occasionally do with groups, and we get them to say, I'm going to say a word, and then write down the first 10 words that come into your head when I say this word. And then we say the word money. And we give them like less than a minute to write down 10 words. So everybody scrawls down their 10 words. And then we get them to highlight any words that are negative. Because people write things like broke, problems, those type of things, unresourceful. And so they highlight those words. Then we ask them this question. How many people whose words are highlighted there are those words their parents' words or their grandparents' words? In every case, it's basically that. So their parents have imprinted on them that money is bad. Maybe they came from a poor home, so they go, rich people suck, right? So they're thinking, if I have money, I'm going to suck. My mother told me all salespeople are criminals. It took me years to work out that, hang on, if that can't be true, because if I want to get a partner in life, I'm going to have to sell them on me. If I want to get a job, I'm going to have to sell them on me. So it's not that all salespeople are criminals, but we get imprinted with these things all along. And I mean, Landi often talks about one where she must have been 5 or 6 years old, and a girl at school, she was running along, stuck out her foot and tripped her over, and everybody laughed. So therefore, she became really aware then of people trying to trip her up. But it was just one stupid incident. But she still remembers it today. Mm. That's what happens when you get into these imprints and you don't cleanse them.
Got you. Yeah, personally, on the money front, it's an interesting one because for a lot of my adult life, I went through those different growth stages with a very negative outlook on money, because I felt like money was the root of all evil. I looked around me and I see what money does to people, to friendships, to families. You see the relationship between governments and money. You look at the world right now and the financial turmoil we're going through this existential crisis, because you could say that there's this behavior of how money's been handled and been printed and spent by governments. We've got this financial crisis that makes 2008 look like child's play, but they didn't solve it in 2008. There's only one solution in my opinion that did solve it, and that's a Bitcoin discussion, which is a podcast on its own. But, I think there was a mentor I had, Salala, who he heard me speaking the one day and I was extremely negative. And he said, as long as you have that mindset and perception about money, you're always going to struggle with money.
He's right.
Yeah.
It's almost like having a set of eyeballs. When you're born, that set of eyeballs is so clean and so clear and so crisp and so full of stars. And then as you get imprinted, that eyeballs get muddy. Mm. And so this process that we're talking about is basically becoming aware of the fact that the way you view the world is because of the type of experiences and people you've had in your life. And that includes media and what you've put your eyeballs on. So what is really required in order to clean those eyeballs and have new eyeballs? And that's why me and Mike believe that one of the most powerful ways to manifest is to get your innocence back. Because your innocence means getting new eyeballs. Now, think of all the people that cheated on you and lied to you and all the experiences you went through. What courage does it take? What conscious leader will get to the point where they are willing to develop the character where they're going to fight with every fiber in their being for their innocence? That's true manifestation power.
Love that. And if we bring it into the context of the workplace, I've always followed leadership, and it's palpable, right? You can tell immediately when you have leadership and when you don't. And I've seen what it does to organizations that used to have a leader, and for whatever reason that leader had to leave the organization, and this massive change comes. And it's supplemented with someone who doesn't have leadership qualities, and what that does to the mental and motivational well-being of the organization and its employees. So maybe you can just share a little bit more about what it is that you do when you're dealing with organizations. Where do you come in? Is that at an executive level, operational level? What does your work look like? And maybe share a little bit around.
For us personally, we're always at the basically HOD level, right? So, senior execs, people who have got lots of people underneath them, etc. Because if you can provide them with a different perspective, a more conscious perspective, then that just naturally will filter down. There's a great way to do it, which is actually starting at the bottom and filtering up as well. But that takes a lot more effort and a lot more time. And that's because we're so diverse in what we do, we just don't have that time. So I think often you just start with one thing. So let's come back to the money thing. So, in a group, we do an exercise, get people to write down their 10 things about money. Everybody would have something negative. Sometimes people don't. Then we'd ask the question, so hands up in the room if you've ever had a time in your life where you've literally run out of money. You literally had no money. Now, this always surprises everybody because around 90% of people in the room have their hands up. So pretty much, and we've done this a lot, so pretty much everybody has had times in their life, myself included, where we've literally run out of money. Now, the fascinating thing is that when you'd think that'd be a negative experience, but it's actually a very positive experience for people because they realize how resourceful they became. I remember a guy telling me he was traveling in India in the 1970s and he ran out of money and he couldn't contact anybody back home in America or anything like that. He couldn't get any traveler's checks. So he literally had to basically, was he going to beg? Was he going to get a job? So he had to become resourceful, and he learnt so much about himself. So if we now take that analogy and bring it into the boardroom, you've got to allow people to learn that they're actually a lot more resourceful, that they're actually, they actually want different things than they thought that they wanted as imprints. I'll give you a great example because it happened in this country many years ago, where I spoke with and had a session with the CEO of one of the biggest banks in the world.
Yeah, you're talking about Singapore?
Yep, in Singapore. And I sat with this guy, and it's a really nice guy, and I just kept asking him the same question. I thought he was getting frustrated. I just kept asking him the same question. So what do you want? What do you really want? What does that look like? Just different versions of that question. When it got down to it, he said, Mike, I just want to go home at 5 o'clock and be able to tuck my kids into bed. And then he burst out crying in his office. He said, I've been in this job 3 years. I've never once tucked my kids into bed. And so that imprint was changing all his decisions because he was becoming so harsh on the people underneath him because he felt it was his obligation to be there like until the last person left in the office because he was the CEO of this mighty organization. But actually it was destroying the things that he held most valuable. And if it destroys the family, then he's going to destroy the organization. So once he started saying to the people around him, 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday and Friday, I'm going to go home at 6 o'clock because I want to tuck my children into bed, things just started improving because he got lighter. And when he got lighter, he saw more opportunity. Rather than coming down on people, he started looking and empowering people rather than managing people. And the organization did a massive shift inside of 6 months. It can be that simple.
So in addition to what Mike is saying, when we work with the corporates, we basically give them the suite of skills available to be the leader they want to be that they maybe have not seen before. And, that can include showing them what values and boundaries look like, showing them what a true resilient mindset looks like in this VUCA world everyone is talking about. It's one thing to say that you need the ability to be resilient, but that word's been thrown around so many times. What does it really mean? What skills do you need? What mindset do you need? What resources do you need when the unknown comes, and the unknown's not going to stop coming. The pandemic is over, but it blows my mind how many people just forgot about the personal life experiences, the personal unknowns, the divorces, the company that goes bankrupt, the friend that betrays you. These unknowns is always going to be around us, regardless of the state that the world is in. And we're going to need the resources. So we help these corporates, these executives to play a bigger game so that they can help the people at the level below them to play a bigger game, so that they can help their teams who they're working with to play a bigger game, and so that the whole ecosystem eventually can vibrate at a higher level. You can say, there's not a lot of good parenting going on these days, so people are, as you said, tend to many times swing for materialistic things, but our experience of people and culture across the world is everyone just wants love. Everyone wants love and want to be loved. So, part of our job is to teach executives how to love the ecosystem that they've created better.
Wow.
And there's some really distinct outcomes of having a leadership team that's more conscious, a conscious leadership team. One is that they move from a competitive vision to a collaborative vision.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're not trying to
up the other
bank, up people in their department. They become more collaborative. So they realize that everything they ever wanted is actually resources that are around them. They move from to-do list leadership, which, to be brutally honest, most leaders in the world are taught. I mean, if we had one objective, if you said to Landi and I, what's one thing you would like to be known for? We would say to get rid of to-do lists out of people's lives, because every day you have a to-do list, almost everybody on the planet fails every day. Try and do that 365 days a year and see how your mindset is. So we move them from a to-do list sort of mindset to values-based leadership. So if you're leading by understanding your values and what they are, that's the most important thing. We make the team purpose-driven, not goal-driven, but purpose-driven. And that has the other outcomes of providing legacy which, let's face it, a lot of leadership teams don't have. Their only legacy, the footprint they leave, is actually a bad one. Everybody's got to come in and fix it. And also that they make a difference every day. So they're really the 5 things: collaborative leadership, purpose-driven, legacy, making a difference, and values-based. Yeah. So they're the 5 sort of outcomes of a conscious leadership business. And it's fascinating because I remember I worked for a company in the early 90s. And when I met the CEO for the first time on my first day, he said to me, I'm not really the CEO. He said, I'm just a custodian of the future.
Oh, wow.
Now, that guy was a great CEO.
Yeah.
He was a great CEO. And everybody loved him, and he did a great job. He was there for 10 years. He did a great job. And then he retired and went to the next guy, and he was good. And then after that, went to the next person, and they had none of those values there. And the whole company, I left, and the company dropped 50% in turnover within a year.
So the impact of that leadership or lack of leadership or conscious leadership basically will begin to show throughout the performance of a business, which is linked to its employees.
100%.
Yeah. Interesting. And are you able to, how do you deal, because something I've observed, especially in the corporate space, is narcissists tend to rise to the top. Are you able to turn a narcissist into a conscious leader, or is that just something that you can't fix?
I think, for us, we've never wanted to fix anyone. We hold the space in which a person are welcome to enter if they made the conscious decision that they want to play a bigger game. So I think there's lots of people in especially the personal development and professional development industry that has their little black book, it's like an evangelist mindset almost, I've fixed this one and fixed this one and fixed this one, and then I fix the world, and then they die and they go, wow, I've fixed so many people. This planet would have never been great if I didn't. Now that's narcissism in itself.
Absolutely.
So, if you have this fixing mindset, so we just build the empire. Or the beehive or the ecosystem, whatever you want to call it. And if you are attracted to things like love and playing a bigger game for yourself and looking for like-minded people and a desire within your heart to learn more and be a better version of yourself, or one that's really big these days, finding out what on earth your purpose is. Why did you come? Why did you come here? What is it that you actually meant to do? Then our space that we've created has place for all sorts of people. It has place for the premium client who really want to invest in themselves. It has place for the person who only want to read a book about conscious leadership, and that's what they want to do at the moment. And it has space for the person who want to access a free online course because they just in the beginning of the seeking process, or it has a space for the person who wants to go through a whole curriculum of material because that's where they are. So our approach is really more like a moth to a flame, come in if you want to, as opposed to us hunting you out and going, now come on,
we'll fix you.
Sit up straight, and now we're going to fix you, and this is A, B, and C that needs to happen in order for you to be fixed. That in itself is narcissism.
And I would say, in relation to your question, Llewellan, that if a narcissistic CEO invites Mike and Landi in to work with his or her senior team, then their soul is actually asking that they don't become a narcissist anymore.
Yeah.
Their soul is doing that.
And the fascinating thing about this is that why do we all sit and believe that there's a rise in narcissists? Who started that trend? Who researched that trend? Where is the case studies and the proof? And that is the danger of social media. Some person starts saying there's so many narcissists. People start having podcasts about narcissists. Before it, the whole world believed there's a bunch of narcissists somewhere, but where are they and who did the studies? And so I think that's the very essence of consciousness, is to rise above all these trends and fads and go, are there really a bunch of narcissists around us? Or wait, am I the narcissist?
That's such an interesting point, because if you look at the world today, this concept of fixing things, okay, so and this manifestation of issues I think there is research around this, when it comes to anything like anorexia, or when it comes to the current transhumanism debate, the climate change debate. And what's interesting is how a narrative can pick up momentum. And where before there wasn't many cases of something, all of a sudden there's this massive spike in cases, or this hardcore ideology, where they're trying to fix climate change and they're trying to now force things down people's throats in a way that almost becomes militant.
Yeah.
And then becomes counterintuitive to actually solving the problem. And I like your analogy of a moth to a flame. You kind of almost have to be open and be willing to share knowledge and kind of have the discussion.
Yeah. And, if you put things into context and you actually want to get closer to reality, the issues are not necessarily gender and climate change and the rise of the narcissists and all these things that's circling us, if I may put it like that. The issue is your parents rejected you and you've not dealt with it. The issue is you being unhappy with the way you are born or built, and you've not built your confidence around it. The issue is individual, whereas we are being told that there's a huge collective issue, and so we as a collective have to solve it. But practically, where does it leave you? What are you going to do about it? The only thing you really have control over is what are you going to do with your imprints, and how is that going to raise your vibration? And can you imagine if the collective does that, what we can achieve as a species?
Yeah, sure. Because I feel like often we put into boxes. You have to be left, or you have to be right, or you have to be a climate change activist, or you have to be, whatever it is. It just feels like we, instead of just looking at things, zooming out and looking at things holistically and discussing it, we get put into these boxes and then march, against that theme, which I think if I look at the world, there's a lot of interesting things manifesting from different regions of the world that have that far left liberal approach, which freaks me out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's meant to divide, isn't it? Me and Mike call it diversion. So if you don't want an individual, if you don't want Llewellan to look inside himself and deal with the stuff that's affecting your vibration, in what way will I achieve that? I'll just divert your attention all the time.
Yeah, let's create a climate crisis. Because, of course, that's really bad. Now you've got attention there instead of on you. Let's create a pandemic. Let's create
two political parties
fighting each other, right? Let's create a
race war.
Yeah.
Race war. Let's create create a Harry and Meghan.
Yeah.
And make that popular. All of these stuff, they're all diversion. But they're only diversion if you choose to embrace them. You can sit back and look objectively and go, is there climate change or not? Okay. And then you can make your decision based on your set of value systems. So one of the things I'm all about is getting people to look internally, because internally has the answers, and your answer internally may not be the same as mine, but it doesn't mean you're wrong and I'm right, or I'm wrong, right, and you're wrong. All of those sort of things. It's your truth, and your truth is what makes the world a better place. I remember when we were in Mongolia a few years ago, Landi asked one of the shaman that we were lucky enough to meet what his view on religions of the world were. And he said that his view was that there should be no bringing together of religions. Everybody should have different religions, as we do. And the beauty is that we have different religions and different viewpoints, but that we can discuss them openly so that we can all learn.
Yeah. Dive into each of them, right?
Of course, yeah.
I mean, that's been the most amazing thing. Again, brought up in a Christian household, then having a bit of an identity crisis. Then my mother went into Buddhism, and I went down that path. Then I went into Vedanta, and then coming out of all of it and going through each one of them, finding love for each of those greats, and what they were trying to do, having a better understanding that is less dogmatic and less I'm right, you wrong, Christianity, Muslim, and a greater love for all. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're at the point now where, people, the person who eats meat and the vegetarian and the vegan all want to kill each other. It's just not. How do you condone that? How do you condone that divisiveness between people?
That intolerance, again, it's this weird thing that I'm observing where, people believe that what they're doing is good or right, whether it's for themselves, for the planet, for a cause, a racial belief, and then become so dogmatic in that belief, even religion, certain religions, but completely missing the point and then becoming the very problem that they thought they were trying to solve.
Of course. I could not have put it any better. That's exactly. People are becoming the problems that they so desperately want to solve.
What do they say? The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
There you go.
Of course it is.
No, that's that's probably a whole discussion on its own. But again, thank you. I think I want to just quickly touch on two things still from our side. You've got this number of 432 conscious leaders, which I really like that as a concept and a goal, and the deeper meaning behind it. How do you measure? How do you measure when someone becomes a conscious leader? Is there a metric or a set of courses? How do you?
No, it's just like, we're in Singapore, right? If you're a teenager in Singapore and you're not getting 95 out of 100 for your exams, your parents are giving you a good talking to. But in the real world, if you're an entrepreneur and you get it right 51% of the time, you're probably a multimillionaire. So it's not about having ticked off a certain number of boxes
or followers
or anything to become conscious. I think it's just the true intent of the way people are turning up in their life. And I think for the people in our environment, I think if we shared the people that we viewed, because it's our goal, it's not the United Nations goal or whatever, it's Mike and Landi's goal. And, we were hard and we could have easily said, well, we've got 240 of them already. But we said, who truly operates in a conscious way every day?
It's visible, yeah.
It's just visible to us. And, it was a discussion that we had with somebody yesterday where they said, this is our value system. And I said, but you're also doing that. And they say, yes, we are at the moment. I said, so your value system doesn't matter. No, we're building towards it. I said, no, your value system doesn't matter, right? So you can't go out branding your value system as this and then have a bit of that as well. It doesn't work like that.
Living your brand.
Yeah. You've got to be all in or all out, right? You can't be half in or half out, and this is the thing with people who live in the spiritual world and the material world is that, most people who live in the spiritual world ignore the material world. And most people who live in the material world ignore the spiritual world. You've got to have an understanding of the other to make a decision. And so I think, when we look at how we judge somebody who we believe is conscious, they've got to have lived in both worlds and made a decision of whether they're going to put their values first and what they're doing that's for the greater good, even if we don't agree with what they're doing. There's certain concepts out there, we've just discussed a few of them, we don't believe in. But it doesn't mean to somebody who, let's say, wants to save all the penguins in Antarctica, if Mike and Landi don't believe in that, and we do, but, if somebody wants to do that, if that's their life and that's what they're living and that's what they're doing on a daily basis and they're 100% into it, that's pretty conscious as far as I'm concerned, providing they understand the other part of the effort. But where people dabble in consciousness, and this is what we're seeing every single day, and it's coming across the world. There's a statistic I'm going to tell the group this afternoon. In the last 4 years, 75% of CEOs are becoming more conscious. What does that even mean? Does it mean by 5%? Have they changed their value systems? Are they now embracing a different way of doing work? Not really. They're just going, oh, there's something in this spiritual stuff. I better allow it to happen.
I better get conscious.
I better get conscious.
It's almost like greenwashing, right?
Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah.
The same thing's probably going to happen to the discussion around consciousness and conscious leadership.
Yeah.
It's that dilution of, just fluffing it up.
I was in senior management when corporate social responsibility really became a big thing 20 years ago. And my CEO literally said to me, we better throw $1 million at this CSR stuff. Find somebody who actually knows what they think they're doing there and just give them the money and let's see if we tick that box.
Seen that story, yeah.
Yep. It was literally what my CEO said to me. And I'm like, don't you think we should be doing something that actually makes a difference? She goes, we haven't got time to do that. Let's just tick the box.
I've seen that. That's one of my biggest gripes. And, I think in South Africa, we've had some things that have been put in place that have good intent, but they've become distorted.
Absolutely.
Or, there's no consciousness put behind the program or the initiative to unlock its true potential. And I think it's it's making me think of, the Eckhart Tolle book. He talks about communism and why it fails time and time again is because it tends to lack any spirituality, which then results in the principle of communism is about sharing and equality.
Absolutely.
But it all becomes so distorted because the people that drive the communist behavior are then captured by greed and power mongering.
Yep.
And then it distorts the whole model, which results in its failure time and time again.
Which is not equality at all in the first place. So it's interesting how you bring that topic up in relation to conscious leadership, because we do feel, because we get around so much and travel, that there's a lot of idealism put out there about equality, and we personally think is dangerous for especially some of the children in the first world countries who goes into the world. They have this dream of becoming a global citizen. They believe in a full, equitable, fair treatment. Yet I'm not convinced that our souls came to this planet just to have a ball all the time.
So that sense of entitlement almost.
Well, we think it's just going to be, you come from heaven to think you're just going to have a heavenly experience. You probably come from an ideal state to a school called Earth to have inequitable experiences, to understand unfairness, to learn how to collaborate with other people, to work through sometimes really, really tough lessons. So all this whole talk of everything is equitable and everyone should be equitable and everyone should be treated equitable, I think is a very unrealistic view, and in itself takes some of the incredibly important experiences that the soul signed up away from us. Yeah.
The hardships and going through the pain and going through
learn
the fights
from it,
and learning from
grow
it.
from it, and learn how to stand your ground and learn how to become assertive and learn how to build confidence, and all those lessons immediately disappear in a perfect, equitable world. And we see it in these futuristic movies where everyone is put in this perfect simulation where everyone is getting treated equal. But then you have to ask yourself, has equality become the new word for basically just dumbing people down and turning us all into nothing?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I recently read a post somewhere which was along the sense of, I don't know if you've ever gamed, but if you play like a first shooter gaming or any game,
I played Mario Brothers, but
and if you go into God mode, right? Well, this is a statement. If you go into God mode on one of those games, and you can't die, you just play. Eventually, you don't want to play anymore. It's boring.
Of course.
So, and that principle applies.
Yeah.
I think with what you just said, which is so interesting. Quickly, you've written a book on this, Mark.
Yep.
What is the title of the book, and what?
The title is Conscious Leadership: How to Thrive in the New World Ecosystem.
Okay, and it's a bestseller on Amazon.
Yeah, it did a few weeks at the top of Amazon as number one, and it's international bestseller outside of that. Yep.
Nice. And in the book, just you diving into all the concepts that we've discussed today.
There's a lot of concepts in the book. It's book's broken down into three parts. The first section's on energy. So we sort of started our discussion there, which dives into quantum physics. The 432's in there. The second section is on environment. So most people aren't conscious about their environment at all. So to give you an example of that very quickly is somebody will say they're going to become a creative genius, and they'll set up their desk against their wall, right? And you go like, how are you going to ever become creative staring at your wall every day, right? So, and then the third part of the book is about enterprise. So it's energy, environment, and enterprise. So we start with energy, which is the internal, if you like. Then we look at environment, which is the immediate external, emotional, physical, and beliefs. And then we move from that into enterprise, which is how you apply that in your business. And I started the book with the story of Alexander the Great, which is a phenomenal story of somebody who probably achieved more in his life than most people on the planet will ever achieve, but how he went from being incredibly conscious during that, amazingly conscious, and to somebody who became so obsessed with his own narcissistic things that he self-destroyed and was dead at 33.
So interesting. That's a very interesting point, because so what we're saying, and again, I'm just shining a mirror on myself here. I find I ebb and flow with my consciousness, and it comes down to my behavior and what I practice and what I think. And I have moments where I have like really high highs, and I taste definitely. It's normally when I do a cleanse and I do a lot of deep diving into spiritual material. And then I have moments where I'm just, enjoying, certain things in life like alcohol or whatever it may be, that changes my existence. So if we look at the example with Alexander the Great, and I haven't studied him, so you've perked my interest. So you're saying that he was a extremely conscious individual, and then towards the end became egotistical and lost the plot of it?
Yeah, I'll give you a very good example. when his armies, which are like 25% of the size of Darius's armies, and he was the Persian king. When Alexander the Great routed them on the field just in northern Syria, obviously he wanted to capture Darius, but Darius ran away. But Darius ran away, leaving his wife, his children, and all his money there. So Alexander the Great, they were all expecting to get put to death or raped or something. He said, no, you're queens and you're princesses, so you're going to be queens and princesses in my court. And he adopted Darius's mother as his own mother and treated her the way he would treat his own mother.
His enemy, yeah.
His enemy's mother, because he felt that she deserved that reverence, and he felt that his wife deserved that reverence, and so on and so forth. And when he found out that one of Darius's generals had actually killed Darius, during their escape to claim the title of King of Persia, he spent 2 years trying to find that general, and then he had brought him in front of the family and tied him to 4 trees and cut the ropes and sent him off in 4 different directions, because he didn't believe that Darius should be dishonored like that. So that's an incredibly conscious way of doing things, right? It's actually considering, yes, you want to conquer the world. Yes, you've got your mandate, but you're not going to, but there's a set of values there that were his values that he just lived by. And then towards the end of his life, in his last couple of weeks, he had an argument in a drinking competition with a bunch of his friends who had been with him since they were this high. And when one of them told him, "You're just like your father," and turned around to leave, Alexander picked up a spear and threw it at him and killed him. And so that killing of his friend basically led Alexander into a drinking binge, which apparently lasted about 20 days and eventually killed him.
Wow.
So the fascinating part about the story, based on what you said, is that we live in a society that prompts us to go for perfection. That's what you're talking about. Why can't I always be perfect? I try so hard. I just want to be perfect all the time. When I'm perfect all the time, I'll be conscious. That's not necessarily correct. So our souls is set up to balance, to strive for balance, not for perfection. So when you feel you're going too much into that direction, it's probably because you've been going too much in that direction.
Yeah.
So you're going to be in that all the time because you're constantly striving for perfection. So your soul's constantly going to sabotage you to balance you. So what you're experiencing as mistakes or not being perfect is actually the infinite wisdom of your soul trying to balance you out. And I think that's probably in the society where we feel as a species the most pressure, is that constant reach for perfection and mistakenly thinking that's consciousness. It's not. Consciousness is balance. And that's what the ancient shamans try and teach us with their medicine wheel, is say, every person's balance is going to be a different radio station. You're also going to go
the yin and the
to
yang.
this. Yeah, the yin and yang. It's going to constantly try and tune you into balance. So you may wake up in the morning and go like, why did I do that? And berate yourself because in society terms, you're not perfect. But what you should be doing is actually thanking your soul for constantly balancing you out because it's trying to achieve a state of balance, not perfection.
Interesting.
If you get that, you won't be that hard on yourself.
And there's not a person really that I know of or can even think of now that is in perfect balance all of the time.
I don't know a perfect person.
It's tidal. It's like tide in, tide out, but still the ocean's there every day in the same spot. So it's about creating that harmonious balance within yourself.
It is ebb and flow. And it's interesting, 432 is a number of harmony as well, isn't it?
It is a number of harmony because it adds up to 9, which is Pythagoras' number of harmony.
It's what I listen to when I need to focus on work. I put it on YouTube. I do 432, and it definitely is nice and relaxing. Just quickly, maybe as a closing point, so it ties in with your global roadshow. You've got tomorrow. You've got a different event that you're running. What is the event? What are you going to be doing at the event? And thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it. Maybe you can just share some insights around that.
So we do these business masterminds all over the world, and it really creates a win-win situation for everyone in the room. So we get premium entrepreneurs like yourself to come to the event. It's a boutique event. It only goes for 3 hours. During that event, people can pitch their own products and service for 3 minutes. And then we use the opportunity to give them some feedback on how they can bring the essence of what they do and the value they provide to other people down into 3 minutes that people can remember you by. So we started off like that. And then we actually move into asking the people around the table. So what's the challenges you're experiencing at the moment from an entrepreneurial point of view? What's the challenges or the things that you would like to have answers to? And so we solve those then for another hour and a half. But in that process, we get a lot of intelligence. We get a lot of intelligence on what's happening with entrepreneurs in Singapore, what's happening with entrepreneurs in New Zealand, what's happening with entrepreneurs in South Africa, what's happening, we're having one in Iceland this year. So we really, really gather that intelligence. And because of the continuous process of doing these masterminds, business masterminds over and over again, we get placed in the position where we start spotting patterns. What are the real issues across the globe for entrepreneurs? And then we come up with business models that solve those problems. And it's these patterns that's been packaged into business solutions that helps us to bring our Circle of Excellence VIP clients, plus all of our online students, plus all of the areas where we actually bringing entrepreneurial education to bring the latest, the greatest, and the most relevant content that they can possibly find. It's totally unique because it's co-created with our entrepreneurs. And we take all this content and get it accredited by the Education Alliance Finland, which is a third-party global standard for education, to make sure that we do not bring people curated content, but the absolute best real-time content that's been basically collected by us across countries and across industries and across cultures.
And that content is at the most 6 years old, because that's when we started doing masterminds. So we've done over 250 of them. And I know the other day, Llewellan, you saw that book, our Octopus Playbook, which is probably what?
The book, we call it.
5-6 inches thick. And that's full of content that we've created through the mastermind process.
Wow.
That just solves problems.
It's so interesting. And I've been fortunate for the last 9 months to be based in Singapore, running the startup ecosystem with a team for Huawei. And it's just been a mind-blowing experience to have my finger on the pulse of all the latest and greatest tech from around the globe. I mean, we have a database of 3,000 startups, and we do our Spark Ignite global competition, and there was about 1,700 startups last year that responded to that, and we had to work through each one of those innovations. And I really love what I do. And I get to sit with these startups and dive into their business. And I have a real passion for that. So I'm quite excited to see what you do at this event, and then also to see how we can collaborate more, because, I look at startups, that's the oxygen of any economy and the future. And I think a lot of your conscious leadership material and training and consulting, I would like to try and pull as many of the startups from our ecosystem towards you, because I believe they are the change makers, the change agents.
Of course they are.
Absolutely.
They're innovating. There's this pure spirit that exists with an entrepreneur that dives into the deep end, risking everything to create something that the world hasn't seen. And if we can help enhance what they're doing in any way, they are the ones that can make a real impact and change what we see,
I couldn't agree more.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work, and thank you for taking the time to sit in the podcast. And I'm really excited to see what you're going to share with the audience today. And I'm confident that our journey together has just started. So thank you very much.
Appreciate your time and appreciate everybody listening.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Llewellan.
Thank you.